Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you back to the next, basically, episode in this fabulous series about the problems, or as we called it, the many problems of the Quran, focusing on external evidence, specifically dealing with manuscripts and specifically early Quranic manuscripts. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most early Quranic manuscripts that has been discovered, known as the Sanaa manuscript. And in there, there are a number of issues that began to emerge, and a number of scholars basically studied it. And my dear friend here, Dr. Jay Smith, is going to present to us some of those findings by these scholars and why it is important for our Muslim people to pay close attention to these issues. Welcome, dear Dr. Jay, and turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about this Sanaa manuscript. Maybe you can give us a little bit quick background about it.
Absolutely, yeah. The Sanaa manuscript is the most recent manuscript that has been discovered. These other manuscripts have been around for hundreds of years. The Sanaa manuscript was discovered by accident in 1975 when there in Sanaa, in the capital of Yemen, as they were cleaning out the dome of the mosque there in Sanaa, they came across a trapdoor, and when they opened the trapdoor, thousands of manuscripts fell to the ground. Now, that's not surprising. Manuscripts are always kept up in domes. Whenever they start to deteriorate, they don't destroy them; they just hide them up in the domes, and they forget about them. And these were forgotten. And there was nothing a great find until when they looked through the manuscripts that had fallen to the ground. A number of them they couldn't read. The reason they couldn't read is what we were talking about in earlier episodes. They had no diacritical marks, and they had no vowelization.
Correct.
So therefore, there was a dilemma. How were they going to read? How are they going to use these? But they also knew that these had to be very early manuscripts, because they did know, at least there in Sanaa, that the earliest manuscript did not have diacritical marks. So these sets, about 3 or 4 of the ones, well, more than that, but the biggest ones, were certainly much earlier than anything else they'd come across. And so in 1981, the Yemeni government flew down 3 German scholars from Saarland University in Saarbrücken, Western Germany, considered to be 3 of the best in the world on archaic Arabic script. They were flown down to look at these manuscripts, and they immediately took pictures of them because they realized we're dealing with very archaic texts, possibly the oldest ever to be found. As they were discussing it, from what I understand, what I've been told, as they're discussing it, some of those overheard what they were saying, and the Yemeni government quickly confiscated their microfilms.
Out of fear that it will be a problem.
Out of fear that these were problematic. And so they went back, the Germans went back to Germany without their manuscript, without their microfilm, sorry. It was about 1997 that finally the Germans were able to get their microfilms back under the condition that they would give scholarships to 2 Yemeni students, which they did, and they were able to get that passed, and so they got their microfilms back. And that's when I went to see them, and I went to see Gerd Puin there in Germany with his facsimiles of the manuscripts. Now, while they were looking at the manuscripts, they noticed that there was a bleeding through of ink underneath. Now, that's not atypical. That happens with lots of manuscripts are made out of animal skin, in this case, deer skin. And with deer skin, you can write on it, and then you can wash it off and then write over top.
Correct.
Then it becomes what we know as a palimpsest. That's the name that's given to it, the technical name. This was a palimpsest. And that was all over the news. When I remember hearing about that when I was much younger. And, of course, I wanted to know what the lower layer was. And this is what everybody's been waiting for, the lower layer to that text. Now, I'm going to look at the slide, because here you can see the 2 pages of the Sanaa manuscript. And here you can see that lower text. Can you see it? The blue picture on the right. The lower text underneath
is
faded, but we're looking at it using ultraviolet light.
Correct.
And with ultraviolet light, you can pull the 2 scripts apart and then compare them one with the other. Now, what they notice, and this is what's fascinating, according to Muslim scholars, people like Asma Hilali and Sidegi and Gudarzi, these Muslim scholars, they have dated the lower script to around 671, 30 to 40 years earlier than the upper text, which is dated to 705. Now, how they came to their conclusions, I don't know. Until this day, I don't know how you could ever come to conclusions.
And let us tell people why you're concerned about that, because obviously you have to date the ink to be able to tell that, because they're both
Absolutely.
written in the same parchment.
Because the parchment you can date, the only thing you ever do date is the parchment, because you date the carbon reduction and that means you can only date the
age of the animal,
skin
basically,
once the animal dies. Once it dies, it starts to deteriorate, and of course the carbon deterioration is what you measure. It's very inexact.
That's right.
And when the Birmingham manuscript came out in 2015, the dates they gave for that using carbon dating, we're going to get to that later in another episode, was 568 to 645. Well, that's a huge amount of dates. That's over 70 years difference. And that's the same thing with this. You can even the dating the parchment or the vellum is so inexact. How in the world were they able to come to this conclusion? To this day, no one's ever answered that. Because you can't date ink, and the reason why you can't date ink is that ink is a multiplicity of different liquids. You mix them up, and you get it from different parts of the world, and you mix them up, and you get these ointments and these different types of oils and pigments from many different parts of the world, all of which are corrupt the final ink. It's so corrupt that there's no way you can come up with any date. So that's why they don't date ink for that reason.
Correct.
Now, because of that, it was fascinating to see what Asma Hilali did. And Asma Hilali came out with her book, and her book was she came out with her book in just last year. And if you look at the slide that we have there is a picture of her book there on the right, the Sanaa Palimpsest. So it's only been out a few months.
That's right. I just got it myself. It's been published just recently.
It was published, I think, in August of 2017. I got it about 3 or 4 months ago, and I read it through, and immediately I saw that there were problems. Asma Hilali is a Muslim, and so in some ways she was constricted by the need to make sure that she didn't go outside of the classical narrative. But from Asma Hilali's book, The Sanaa Palimpsest, she says this: Dr. Gerd Puyn and Dr. Elizabeth Puyn, both husband and wife, who've done probably the most work on this palimpsest, along with Sadeghi and Godarzi, they all of them considered that the palimpsest is part of a complete Quran codex that is a vestige of a non-canonical reading. Now, unpack that means we've now got here a text. The undertext we cannot find any parallels to it.
Correct.
It is really unique. It is one of a kind. Sadeghi and Godarzi and Elizabeth Puyn believe that the lower text constitutes in itself documentary evidence of a non-canonical Quran. That's a huge statement. We're talking about another Quran that is different than all the others, and then different from the canon. Sadeghi and Godarzi believe that the text is related to the Codex of Ibn Mas'ud, who died in 652. They believe that the variants fit within the reports by early sources about the companion codices. This is the codex that we were talking about in an earlier episode.
That's right.
That comes from the Islamic tradition, from the Hadith and the Tafsir, which are much, much later.
And he actually, according to tradition, argued with Uthman and didn't want to turn in his codex.
Yes, right. That's right. And he said, when you were just a lad, I was already writing, talking about Zayd ibn Thabit. You were just a little lad when I was writing my material.
That's right.
So he was even comparing himself to Zayd ibn Thabit and was quite jealous. Then you have, so that's Sadeghi and Godarzi, that they say it's very similar to Ibn Mas'ud. Dr. Elizabeth Puyn disagrees with them. She believes it is not Uthmanic and not from Mas'ud's Codex, but suggests that, and listen to this, the lower text was in the process of being corrected and made more precisely canonical. She considers the two layers as stages in a process of canonization.
It's a redaction process, basically.
There you go. Basically what she's saying is you have one text that is being created and then raced off, and a new text is being put over time. You can see an evolution in the text within that one palimpsest.
And I would tend to agree based on what I'm seeing so far, but obviously we still need to do more studies on that.
And so what she says, she explains this by saying that the various categories of corrections were attempts to standardize the lower text. Hugely significant. Now, fascinating, you can see when you look at, here you have a Western scholar, a German scholar, who's had more chance to look at this, and the three Muslim scholars disagreeing on the most significant part. And that is, they all agree that it's not the Quran that we have today. They all agree that it doesn't follow any of the patterns that the later compilers. But the Western scholar says, wait a minute, it's worse than that. It is so different that it looks like it is the beginning of a process of canonization, of standardization that's going on.
Therefore, if this theory stands as true theory, and I want to use academic, basically, language here, then every change we're going to see in later manuscripts indicate that this process was continuous.
Okay. Now, what Hilali goes and she says this. These are her conclusions. Notice that every one of these conclusions fall within the classical narrative. She's been very careful to keep it within the Muslim classical narrative. What do I mean by that? This is what Muslims do accept today.
Right.
More when I'm saying scholarly Muslims, not the man in the street, not many of those Muslims who are watching us right now, but certainly the scholars of Islam, they accept, and she's kept it within that narrative. She says there are deviations, Elizabeth Quinn calls them, or variants, as Sadeghi calls them, in the lower text. She knows that. There are only 63 verses in that lower text. Within those 63 verses, they have found 70 variants. That means variants when compared to the 1924 text.
That's right.
Hilali believes that the lower text was a product of a reading circle. That's her conclusion. Now, explain a reading circle.
And the reason why she mentioned this, because in chapter 9 of the Quran, as if you study really the Quran, you know that it doesn't have the Basmala, in the name of Allah. She saw an instruction in there that says, do not read Basmala here, or write Basmala, basically. That's the whole idea. She took this to be an instructional or an educational kind of like a copy. But my question is, why would anyone write this instruction to somebody if they were teaching it to them? They would have taught them this, and that's it.
That's it. You don't write it down.
That's right. Unless if it was a prototype to use and make copies of.
There you see. You can see then this is, and it is saying, I would say it's not a school text. This is a nascent text that was going to be then raised and written over top as they are now standardizing, trying to get to a standard text. Now, Hilali goes on and believes that the lower text, I said that, the upper or the later, the 705 text, she says, of the Palimpsest contains variants as well, and we'll see these later. Therefore, both the lower and the upper texts were corrected significantly and do not agree with the Quran that we have today.
That's correct.
So already you can see this is highly problematic. Elizabeth Quinn is much more exciting. Her conclusions are this. And her conclusions fall outside of the classical narrative. That's why these Muslims do not want to accept hers. There's a bias here. There's an agenda. And they don't want to accept it because they don't dare, and they couldn't. And that's why, in some ways, Hilali is able to then quote Elizabeth Quinn without taking the flak herself. So Elizabeth Quinn says that the lower text is neither Uthmanic, nor is it from Ibn Masud's Codex. So she concludes that the lower text was in the process of being corrected and made more precisely canonical. Thus, the two layers were stages in the process of canonization.
That's right.
And I think both of us here agree with her on that.
That's right.
She suggests that the corrections predate the upper text and were so many that at some stage the corrector abandoned the corrections and the text was palimpsested. Now, to me, it's a no-brainer. If you look and you see two different texts, they don't agree with each other. This has even directions on how you're to read it. It suggests that there were so many corrections, they got tired of, it just became too difficult to work with, so they just washed it all off and then wrote it over on top with what they were getting to, what they were trying to get to.
And whatever they got to in the second layer still doesn't match today's 1924
Here
Quran.
you go. And that's what's fascinating.
That's correct.
That's what's fascinating. And we need to look and we need to ask some questions. Now, just take a look at the graph there. You can take a look at the slide. There you can see on the left side, the lower text. We're only talking about 63 verses. And then the upper text, we're not talking about too many more, maybe about double the number of verses that exist in the upper text. So it's not the complete Quran.
That's right.
As we said earlier, this is only 26% of the Quran. And when we look and see the variants, you can see 63 verses with 70 variants in the lower text. Verbs and nouns are left out. Articles are different. Participles are different. Conjunctions are differences. There are preposition differences. Isolated letters, 29 times isolated letters, expression differences, expressions, and entire sentences. So let's just take a look at just a few of these. We don't have time to go through them all in depth, but here's Surah 2, Ayah 88. I'll do the left, and then you do the Tahireen text. So on the left, it says, our hearts are wrapped, but in fact, Allah has cursed them for their injustice. So little is it that they believe.
Here in the 1924 Kyrene text, it says this, and they said, our hearts are wrapped, but in fact, Allah has cursed them for their unbelief. Yours says, بِظُلْمِهِمْ, here says, بِكُفْرِهِمْ. So little is it that they believe.
Two completely different concepts for the same verse.
That's right.
In chapter 8, verse 74, and I'll just read the whole verse. I'll just say in one on the Sanaa, it's in the name of Allah, with their money and themselves, has been changed now today to say, they did jihad.
Yeah, that's right.
In the name of Allah. Wait a minute.
And this is problematic, basically, because now you're talking about jihad now, and struggle, and many other things.
So you can see that does change it completely. Now here's what, so travel freely throughout the land 4 months, but know that they, look at the word they, do not escape Allah and His Prophet. Okay? And His Prophet in the Sanaa. Now look in the Kyrene text.
Just you cannot escape Allah.
You cannot escape Allah, and His Prophet has been taken out. So there you can see where they've actually reduced it.
And I'm going to tell you why this is important, by the way. Because that would have been probably said when the Prophet was alive. Now the Prophet is not alive. Why do you need it there? So you need to take it out.
Okay.
So the theology continues.
Okay. Here you have chapter 9, verse 9. They have exchanged the sign of Allah and their oath for a small price and averted from the way of Allah. Now that it is taken out, take a look at what they've done. They've exchanged, go ahead.
The signs of Allah for a small price and averted, basically, people from His way.
So they've taken out and their oath completely and just put for a small price.
That's right.
9:13, and why don't you fight a people who broke their oaths, and they were the first to start the aggression, and they intended to drive out the Prophet. Now take a look at how they have changed it and flipped it around for the 1924 Kyrene text.
Will you not fight a people who broke their oath and they intended to drive out the Prophet, and they were the first to start aggression?
There you go. Complete change around. And one is, why don't you? And the other one is, will you not?
That's right.
Completely, it's even more of a question. Surah 9, verse 17, coming on down. For these are those whose deeds fell in this world, in the next, has been changed to.
For those, their deeds fell worthless.
Worthless. You can see that changes it completely. And now in the last stage, now here's what's going to go opposite from what you said. Those who believe in Allah in the last day, and he did jihad in the name of Allah, and did not fear anyone but Allah. Now that has been changed with.
Just basically perform the salat, prayer, and give zakat, and fear none but Allah. There is no jihad whatsoever.
What happened to jihad? Completely thrown out. So you can see jihad was there, now it's no longer there. It makes it more politically correct as well. 9 verse 80, Allah does not forgive them. Indeed, Allah does not guide the defiant, has been changed to.
Allah will not forgive them because they disbelieve in Allah and His Prophet, and Allah does not guide.
Now here, His Prophet is brought back in again. So that just contradicts the earlier one where Prophet is taken out. Isn't that bad? There is no consistency there. You seek welcome has been changed to.
And greet those in them.
Again, that's quite a bit different. For it is good for you. Indeed, Allah is knowing has been changed to.
Is purer for you, and Allah is knowing.
Now, here, and that's the lower text. Now, when you look at the upper text, you can see, and you can go in this in your own time, look and see even in the upper text, they are changed. There we have the upper text on the left, and then the Kyrene 1924 on the right. So this is happening over and over and over again. Can you then see why the Muslims are having such a problem with the Sanaa text? Can you then see why when they call in, they don't want to talk about the Sanaa manuscript. They want to talk about the Topkapi. They have reduced it now, not just to Quran only. They have now reduced it into only one manuscript because the Sanaa manuscript is so problematic. And I think that as we don't need to go into all the conclusions on this one here. But there is a niggling problem. I want to end with this one. With all these problems of the differences and the changes and the fact that these don't follow any of them, look at the one niggling problem that I want to bring up. The biggest difficulty with these two layers is, number one, these are the oldest Quranic fragments in existence today. All the other extant manuscripts are more recent. So why are these layered palimpsests the earliest ones? And where is the original Quran from which these supposed reading texts were derived?
That's right.
See, how is it that these turn out to be the oldest and they don't agree with any other ones that come later? If Muslims are saying that these actually follow one that is earlier than this, that from the time of 652, Where is it? Why is it that the earliest we have is completely different than all the others?
That's correct.
Hugely problematic. And it's a good place to leave it there because Muslims have to deal with this. The scholars have to deal with it. Those who are listening today have to deal. And we're talking to you, Muslims. You're going to have to deal with this material. This is nothing that I would want to defend. I'm so glad we don't have these problems with the Bible.
Amen. So, brother, thank you so much. And next time we are going to talk about the carbon dating that you've heard Dr. J mention numerous times. And then we'll try to help you now to begin to understand at a deeper level why it is going to be a problem when it comes to the early Quranic manuscripts. Until we meet again, have a blessed day. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss future videos. And please consider becoming a patron on patreon.com/Sierra International.